On the coldest night of the year, in a snowy mountain town, a young waitress secretly hid a sick German shepherd puppy beneath her counter, praying no one would notice. But when two wealthy visitors mocked her and nearly harmed the fragile puppy, the entire diner stood still as a single officer quietly rose from his seat and pressed record. This was the night when silence turned into courage, when the law found its true voice, and when a tiny puppy changed the heart of an entire town. Before we begin, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from right now? Let me know in the comments. And if you believe stories of kindness and second chances deserve to be told, please subscribe to support this channel. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that warm hearts even in the coldest winter moments. The winter storm had swallowed the small mountain town of Frostwell, a quiet settlement tucked between pine-laden ridges and half-frozen lakes. Snow fell in slow spirals, as if the sky itself were exhaling memories in powder-white fragments. At the far end of Main Street sat Snowfield Diner, a warm rectangle of amber light against the blue-gray night. Inside, the windows fogged from the contrast of storm air and kitchen steam, while conversations simmered low, like coals beneath logs. Alara Hayes worked the night shift behind the counter. She was 26, with dark brown hair tied back loosely, strands escaping and curling around her cheeks. Her complexion was warm olive, and her eyes held a mild tiredness, as though she had known too many nights without rest. Ilara's posture was the kind that belonged to a quiet survivor, slightly guarded, shoulders never fully relaxed. The stance of someone accustomed to carrying responsibility alone. She was polite and calm with customers, but there was a subtle distance in her tone, an emotional scarcity shaped by earlier hardships. Losing her parents at 17, and having no siblings or relatives willing to take her in. That loneliness had carved into her personality a kind of quiet resilience, an instinct to rely on herself. Tonight, though, she did not stand alone. Beneath the counter, in a makeshift nest of old towels and one thick quilt, lay Aster, an 11-week-old German shepherd puppy. Aster had a sable-tan coat with shadowy accents around her ears and muzzle, and her eyes, an amber honey shade, always looked slightly watery, both from her fever and from a natural softness that made her easy to love. Her body was small but sturdy. Her paws hinted at the strong adult dog she would become. She was gentle, not playful. Even at this young age, she seemed contemplative, almost attentive to human moods. Aster had been found abandoned 3 weeks earlier behind the diner near a trash container. She had likely belonged to someone who no longer wanted or could care for her. Since then, Ilara had become her entire world. Earlier in the evening, before the dinner rush, Ilara had approached her manager, Thomas Keene, a short, balding man in his early 50s with a soft midsection and a tired face marked by permanent creases around the mouth. His personality was practical and somewhat gruff, but not unkind. The kind of man who had seen employees come and go and had learned not to get too emotionally invested. He had never married. Many guessed he had known heartbreak in his youth, though he never addressed it. When approached with vulnerability, however, he often responded with quiet humanity. Ilara had said, voice low, "Just tonight, please. She still has a little fever." Thomas had sighed, looking at the storm outside, then at the small bundle of life inside the basket. He had muttered, "As long as she stays behind the counter, no customers see, no health. Complaints. All right, just tonight." Now, as snow battered the windows, Ilara balanced a tray of steaming mugs, sliding them to customers with soft apologies for delays. Each time she passed the counter, she would brush 2 fingers lightly over Aster's fur to make sure she remained warm. The puppy occasionally let out a tiny whimper, more from discomfort than pain, and Ilara's heartbeat would tighten with worry. At 10:30, the diner door blew open with a gust of icy air. The bell above the frame jingled sharply. Entering first was Veronica Sterling, 28, pale-skinned, tall and slim like a sculpture shaped from frost. She wore a white fur-lined coat and deep red lipstick, and her eyes were sharp, assessing, practiced in superiority. Veronica's personality had been molded by privilege, growing up in a family wealthy enough to own the largest media outlet in the county. She had been taught from childhood that others existed to serve, not to negotiate. Her posture was elegant but stiff, chin slightly lifted, gaze slightly downward, as though the world was a stage and she was its critic. Behind her came Chase Turner, 27, broad-shouldered, with blonde hair slicked to one side. He wore a black leather jacket and walked with the swagger of someone who believed consequences were for other people. His father was the chief of police. The fact alone gave Chase an invisible shield of impunity. He liked provoking others, liked being seen, liked the subtle fear or compliance he could wring from people. He wasn't purely cruel. He simply lacked empathy, having been raised in an environment where accountability never landed on him. The local patrons observed their entrance with quiet disapproval. Most residents of Frostwell worked in blue-collar winter labor, logging, snow equipment servicing, or seasonal tourism. The Sterling Turner pair represented the wealthy tier that treated the town as a playground rather than a community. Veronica sat down at the counter, crossing her legs neatly. Chase followed, drumming his fingers against the stool. Ilara approached with her usual professional warmth. "Good evening. What can I get for you?" Veronica's voice, low and smooth, carried command. "Cinnamon latte, no sugar, orange peel, thin, not lemon." She didn't look at Ilara while speaking, as though reciting to the air. Ilara repeated respectfully, "Cinnamon latte, no sugar, orange peel." Then she went to prepare it, but Aster whimpered softly, a trembling sound. Ilara glanced down quickly, checking her temperature with her palm, reassuring her with a whisper, "Shh, I'm here." That was enough, a second of distraction. Ilara reached into the small garnish tray and lifted the wrong citrus slice. Lemon. She placed the drink before Veronica. Veronica lifted it, inhaled. A pause. Then, she set it down with a quiet thud. Her voice was not loud. Worse, it was icy and precise. "I made myself clear. Do you work with ears or with a brain?" At that moment, Aster coughed in a pitiful, breathy yelp. Ilara immediately knelt behind the counter, gently soothing her. Chase noticed. A grin slithered across his face. He drawled, "You know you're poor when your only family is a mutt." A few customers shifted in discomfort. One of them, a truck driver named Sarah McCleary, looked over. Sarah was 51, short with strong arms, mixed race with chestnut brown skin. She had spent decades on long-haul routes across the northern states. Life on the road had made her blunt but compassionate, especially toward those trying to survive with dignity. She said sharply, "Don't talk to her like that." Chase swung one leg outward in mock laziness. Anne casually nudged Ilara with his boot. It wasn't a kick, more like a push to assert dominance. But it was enough that Ilara's hand slipped and she almost fell onto Aster. A collective breath sucked through the diner. A young mother near the window rose halfway from her seat. "Hey, stop!" Another man, middle-aged flannel shirt, raised his voice. "Want me to call the cops?" Chase smirked. "Go ahead. My dad runs them." And in that charged moment, a hush rolled over the diner. The storm outside roared, but inside, everything froze. Under that silence, Aster shivered, not from fever this time, but from sensing fear in her human. And Ilara, quietly, protectively, placed her body between the puppy and the world. The next morning, Frostwell awoke beneath skies the color of steel. The storm had eased, but the cold remained, a cold so sharp that it etched the air with crystalline clarity. The town's rooftops lay blanketed in snow, untouched except for the small trails of bird prints and the occasional paw mark left by stray dogs. Main Street stirred slowly, store owners scraping ice from window frames, a delivery van crunching through frost, children bundled like walking quilts trudging to school. Inside Snowfield Diner, the world was warmer. Coffee machines hummed, utensils clinked softly, and soft jazz from the radio drifted like candle smoke in the air. The night shift had ended, and Ilara remained, exhausted but determined. She sat at an empty booth near the kitchen, with Aster curled beside her legs inside a blanket-lined basket. Aster looked better that morning, still weak, but less feverish. She wagged her tail slowly when Ilara stroked her head. That simple motion, the soft thump-thump against the blanket, was enough to make Ilara's throat tighten with relief. Thomas Keene, the manager, approached with a clipboard. His breath still carried traces of mint mouthwash, and his morning fatigue hung over him like a wrinkled sweater. He adjusted his glasses and looked at Ilara with cautious concern. "You staying after your shift?" he asked. Ilara looked up, eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. "Just until she stabilizes, then I'll take her home." Thomas studied her. He had never been an expressive man, but a quiet softness crept into his tone. "Take a few extra hours off if you need. I'll mark it as personal time." Ilara stared at him, surprised. "Thank you." He nodded awkwardly and walked away, someone uncomfortable with gratitude but willing to do the right thing. By late morning, business picked up as locals came in for brunch. Snowfield Diner wasn't just a place to eat. It was the heart of Frostwell. A communal hearth, a gossip hub, a slice of familiarity. Old Mrs. Greaves, a tiny widow with silver-white hair and cloudy eyes, sat near the window knitting. Jake Rollins, a young mixed-race mechanic with grease stains permanently etched under his nails, devoured a plate of eggs. Sarah McClary, the trucker who had spoken up last night, returned as well, ordering black coffee and oatmeal. These were regulars, and though they hadn't spoken again of the incident, their presence alone felt like a silent shield around Ilara. At 11:05 a.m., the diner bell rang once more, but this time, the entrance lacked last night's dramatic gust of wind. Instead, Veronica Sterling walked in slowly, deliberately. She wore a charcoal gray wool coat draped over her shoulders and her blonde hair tied back in a rigid braid. Her pale face looked the same, but something in her posture had shifted, less lifted chin, less queen-like hauteur. Behind her came Chase Turner, hands stuffed into his pockets, eyes darting around with defensive paranoia rather than arrogance. Their energy was cautious, watchful. The entire diner sensed it. Conversations softened, forks paused, people looked. Veronica sat at the same counter seat as the night before. Chase sat beside her, but this time, rather than leaning back with cocky ease, he hunched forward slightly, elbows resting on the counter. Ilara approached with calm professionalism, though her chest tightened. "Good morning. What can I get for you?" Veronica opened her mouth, then hesitated. Her icy certainty seemed to melt just a degree. "Same drink as before, but—" She stopped, searching for a word she'd never had to reach for. "Please." It was small, but meaningful. Ilara blinked, then nodded softly. As she turned toward the espresso machine, Sarah McClary leaned slightly to whisper, "Don't trust the politeness. Might be bait." But there was a kindness in the warning. Sarah wasn't trying to provoke drama. She was protective. While the latte brewed, Chase tried to speak. His voice lacked its usual lazy venom. "About last night," Ilara shook her head gently without turning. "I'm working. Please don't." He closed his mouth. For once he obeyed. But Veronica did speak, quietly. "We shouldn't have acted that way." Ilara turned, surprised at the sincerity. Veronica's eyes looked less like polished gems of entitlement and more like windows showing a trapped, anxious young woman. The transformation wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, fragile. "You're right," Ilara told her. "You shouldn't have." As Ilara presented the drink, with orange peel correctly cut, Veronica met her gaze directly. "Thank you." It was the first time she spoke to Ilara as an equal. Meanwhile, at the booth behind them, Mrs. Greaves murmured to Sarah, "Maybe the cold knocked some sense into them." Sarah snorted softly. Then, Astor let out a small bark. Not a distressed one, but a curious one. She had woken and was sniffing the air, eyes bright. Chase turned, and his face flickered with something unexpected. Regret. "How's the pup?" he asked quietly. Ilara hesitated. Was this a trick? A performance? But no. His shoulders were slumped, his voice came small. "She's recovering," Ilara said simply. He swallowed. "Good." No sarcasm, no sneer. From behind the counter, Thomas watched. He understood something important. Last night had shifted the balance of Frostwell. The privileged pair had crossed a line and been publicly checked, and now they were openly facing social accountability for the first time in their lives. Chase lowered his head. "Look, I don't usually—" He struggled, possibly for the first time in years. Ilara finished the sentence for him. Think before you act? His lips twitched in half agreement, but Veronica interjected, not angrily, not sharply, but with trembling candidness. We thought money and status would shield us from everything. It was a confession, not an excuse. People in the diner listened, not gleefully, but thoughtfully. In that moment, Jake Rollins spoke up from across the room. His voice was steady, but firm. You hurt someone smaller than you. Doesn't matter if it's a dog or a person. That's coward behavior. Chase nodded slowly, absorbing it. Veronica stared at Aster, the tiny creature they had indirectly endangered, and the puppy stared back with forgiving curiosity. Finally, Chase reached into his coat and pulled out a folded note. He placed it on the counter and pushed it toward Alara. She didn't open it, just looked at it suspiciously. He said, "It's not money, just something I wrote down." She unfolded it carefully. On the note were 4 words, handwritten. I was in the wrong. No defense, no justification, just an admission. Alara exhaled slowly. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no handshake, no forced forgiveness, just a shift. Aster stood up in her basket and stretched her legs, then carefully padded across the floor until she reached Chase's feet. She looked up and gave a quiet boof, a soft puppy bark, inquisitive rather than fearful. Chase blinked, surprised. Then, very gently, he extended a hand. Aster sniffed it. Then she licked his knuckle once. Not much, but enough. The tension in the room dissolved, not into warm love, not into friendship, but into the first step of humanity. Evening returned to Frostwell with a violet tint across the sky, as though dusk were smudged by charcoal. The snowstorm did not strike again that night, but a bitter wind still wandered through the streets like a restless ghost. Lanterns in front of storefronts flickered, and a hush lay over the town, the type of quiet that feels as though something is coming. Snowfield Diner was once again lit warmly from within, though the tone was different from the night before. The previous day's tension had cooled into something contemplative. People spoke softly, glanced occasionally at the front door, and waited with anticipatory curiosity. And sure enough, they returned. At 7:42 p.m., the bell above the door jingled sharply, and Veronica Sterling and Chase Turner walked in again, 3rd day in a row. But this time, Chase's steps were stiff with self-consciousness, not entitlement. Veronica's chin was slightly lowered, her expression unreadable, not humbled entirely, but shaken. Something in her confidence had cracked the previous night, though it didn't shatter. Alara Hayes noticed their arrival while wiping down a booth. She straightened, calm and steady. She had decided the night before that she would serve them, but not indulge them emotionally. She would not carry past anger, but neither would she warm them with premature forgiveness. Under the counter, Aster stirred. The puppy was stronger that evening, tail wagging with shy eagerness, ears perked. The fever was nearly gone, thanks to careful water intake, rest, and medication from the local vet. What Aster lacked in size, she made up for in intuition. And she sensed Ilara's alertness. The pup pressed closer to her leg, offering silent solidarity. Chase and Veronica took their familiar seats at the counter. Sarah McClary, the trucker, sat 3 stools away. Arms crossed over her chest like a weary guardian of justice. Her stern profile, strong jaw, narrow eyes, short curly hair, streaked with silver, made her look like someone carved out of road miles and unspoken wisdom. At a back booth sat a retired bus driver named Howard Finnegan, a tall, lanky Caucasian man in his 60s with deep wrinkles from decades of wind exposure. He was a Frostwell local who had seen fights, disasters, winter emergencies, and economic downturns. And he always believed people might learn if given a chance. Inside the diner, eyes followed Chase's every move. He felt it. Veronica felt it. There was no audience applause, no boos, just silent judgment. Alara approached with measured neutrality. Evening, same orders? Veronica nodded silently. Chase cleared his throat. Yes, and thank you. His voice lacked confidence, but carried sincerity. As Alara walked away, the hush in the diner grew thicker. At a corner table, a mother with a toddler whispered to her friend, "That boy thought he ruled this town." Maybe this is good for him. Howard Finnegan murmured back, only if he learns. Some don't. But here is where fate tightened its grip, because while Alara prepared the drink, Aster decided to make an entrance. The puppy clambered up from her basket and trotted toward the counter. She no longer moved weakly. Tonight, she moved with deliberate steadiness. Her fur looked fuller, warmer, healthier. She squeezed between stools until she reached Chase. The room collectively held breath. Chase looked down. Aster stared up. Then, without hesitation, the puppy placed one small paw tentatively upon Chase's boot. Just a touch. A gesture of contact. Chase froze. The entire diner froze. It was as if the universe had created a moment just for him. A test of whether he was still the same man as 3 nights ago. Slowly, Chase lowered his hand. Aster sniffed his fingers. Then she licked them once. And in that lick, the room saw something. Not submission, but forgiveness. Not weakness, but acceptance. Sarah let out a tiny exhale of disbelief, like someone witnessing a miracle they didn't think they deserved. Howard Finnegan nodded slowly, as though he had expected this moment to arrive. Meanwhile, from a table in the back, a teenage boy with freckles whispered, "She doesn't hold grudges like we do." His grandmother, Mrs. Greaves, gently corrected him. "No, dogs remember the pain. They just choose love anyway." At the counter, Chase's eyes welled unexpectedly. He blinked hard and looked away. He wasn't used to vulnerability. He had always known how to be confident, not how to be remorseful. Veronica watched him, and for the first time, she saw Chase not as the untouchable son of power, but as a man stripped of public armor. She felt something shift inside her, not pity, but recognition. Because she, too, had lived behind inherited power for so long that she had mistaken it for identity. Alara returned and watched the scene silently. She spoke evenly. "She doesn't judge, but that doesn't erase what happened." Chase swallowed. "I know." Sarah McCleary finally spoke up, her voice carrying years of road grit. "Saying sorry isn't enough. Changing how you act, that's the real apology." Chase nodded. "I plan to." Veronica spoke as well, but her tone was different, no longer icy, but contemplative. "Last night, when the state authorities arrived, I realized how fragile status really is." Howard added dryly, "Privilege protects you until it doesn't." The wind outside howled faintly, as if echoing the truth. Then the door opened again, and a new character entered. Officer Eli Cross, 32, 6'1", Caucasian, with rugged features softened by tired eyes, stepped inside. He wore his police uniform, navy blue, with a silver badge glinting beneath fluorescent light. Eli carried himself with quiet competence, a man who believed in the work more than the title. He had a straightforward beard shadow, broad shoulders, and the build of someone physically capable but never aggressive. His personality had been shaped by years in service, calm, observant, principled. He treated everyone equally, criminals, victims, innocents, not because he lacked opinion, but because he understood law required balance. When Eli walked in, Chase stiffened instinctively, because this was the man who had confronted him, who had stopped him, who had put accountability on him. Eli walked up to Alara first. "How's the puppy?" Alara smiled softly and gestured to Aster, now curled at Chase's feet. "Recovering, stronger every hour." Eli nodded and looked at Chase, not unkindly, just honestly. "You ready to answer some questions tomorrow?" he asked. Chase inhaled shakily. "Yes, I'll cooperate." The diner listened. Veronica looked between them and murmured, "We both will." No one applauded, but no one mocked them either, and right then, something profound happened. Aster left Chase's feet, crossed back to Alara, and sat between Alara and Eli. 3 beings, 3 lives, 3 different pathways of struggle, standing in a small triangle of shared existence. Outside, snowflakes drifted lazily, illuminated in the diner's warm glow, as though winter itself were pausing to witness compassion being formed. Eli crouched to Aster's level, rubbing her ears affectionately. "Good girl." To Alara, he said quietly, You protected her. Last night, and every night before. Ilara's voice softened. She's all I've got. Eli replied, Not anymore. His tone didn't hold romance. It held solidarity. The night ended with quietness, not tension. When Veronica and Chase stood to leave, they did so not with dominance, but with gratitude. Before exiting, Veronica turned back. We'll be back tomorrow to help cover medical expenses for Aster. Gasps flickered through the diner. Ilara raised a hand gently. That's kind, but not necessary, Veronica insisted softly. It's not charity, it's accountability. And then they stepped into the night. The diner exhaled, and the wind carried away the last of yesterday's bitterness. The next morning dawned crisp and sunlit, as though Frostwell itself wished to witness what would unfold. The sky was a vast pale blue, brushed with silver clouds drifting like slow-moving thoughts. Snow still crusted the streets, white and silent, reflecting morning brightness. The cold wind had calmed, leaving a crystalline clarity in the air, a quiet truthfulness. Ilara Hayes walked into the police substation of Frostwell with Aster bundled in her arms. She wore a thick wool coat, faded burgundy, and a knit hat that covered her ears. She was not summoned. She chose to attend voluntarily. Inside, she felt that whatever accountability was happening today, she had earned the right to witness it. Aster, fully awake now, looked around with alert ears, sniffing the chilled air of the lobby. Her fever had broken overnight. She now resembled the puppy she was meant to be, curious, lively, hopeful. At the reception desk sat Deputy Laura Finch, a sturdy woman in her 40s with short sandy hair and a sturdy build. She had a square jaw that gave her a serious look, but her hazel eyes carried a distinct empathy. Laura had grown up in a military family where rules were strict and discipline was expected, but she also possessed a deeply human sense of fairness. She often fought internally between compassion and procedure, and she always tried to err on the side of decency. Morning, Ilara, Laura greeted gently. The meeting's in the conference room. You're welcome to sit in, as a witness. Ilara bowed her head slightly. Thank you. The room beyond was a rectangular meeting space with glass walls. Inside sat Chase Turner at one end of the table. The difference between today and the earlier nights was stark. Chase looked smaller, because he felt smaller. His hair was not slicked back. It lay more naturally, no longer styled as a statement of force. His shoulders hunched inward slightly. His jaw, which usually radiated confidence, now seemed unsure. He was not chained, not handcuffed. This was not that kind of session. But he was being held accountable. Veronica Sterling sat beside him. She wore a black coat, her long braid resting over her shoulder. She looked composed, but her eyes betrayed nervousness. Her fingers tapped lightly against the table, not impatiently, but anxiously. Across from them sat Officer Eli Cross. He arrived not with intimidation, but with quiet assurance. Eli had an air of grounded steadiness. Today he wore no service hat, just the standard uniform with his badge visible on his chest. For Chase, that badge had once symbolized protection and privilege. Now it represented scrutiny and truth. Eli's eyes lifted when Ilara stepped in. They exchanged a respectful nod. Allies, though not declared. Chase glanced at them too. And when he saw Aster in Ilara's arms, his face flickered with suppressed emotion. That puppy had forgiven him before any human did. At the far end of the table sat State Investigator Daniel Hurst, a man in his mid-40s with a quiet intensity. He had salt and pepper hair, hawkish blue eyes, and a calm voice accustomed to extracting truth. He was only here because of Eli's recording, because there had been complaints before, and because the pattern had finally gained weight. The meeting began. Daniel Hurst spoke first. Mr. Turner, last week you were part of a reported physical harassment incident at Snowfield Diner. And over the past 2 years, there have been 3 other complaints regarding your aggressive behavior in public. We are here to ensure that today is the last time this conversation is necessary. Chase swallowed. He looked to Veronica, not for escape, but for courage. Veronica locked eyes with him and nodded just once. Speak, she whispered. Chase exhaled. Then he did something people rarely expect from the privileged. He told the truth. I behaved badly. I was disrespectful. I pushed Alara with my boot. I mocked her. I mocked the puppy. His voice broke. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't theatrical. It was real. Veronica placed one hand on the table, not on Chase, but close enough to ground him. She spoke next. I enabled him, and I participated in the disrespect. We treated people as lesser, and that was wrong. The room didn't relax, not yet, because words had been spoken, but their meaning had not been tested. Daniel Hurst turned to Eli. Officer Cross, you witnessed the event firsthand? Eli nodded. Yes, and I intervened because the situation escalated physically, Daniel continued. In your professional assessment, did Mr. Turner intend to cause harm? Eli leaned forward, and to everyone's surprise, he didn't condemn Chase. He acted recklessly, but I don't believe he intended actual injury. That doesn't excuse the behavior, but I believe it can be corrected through accountability rather than punishment. There was a pause. Chase stared at Eli. The man who had confronted him, the man who had recorded him, the man who had checked him, was also the man willing to speak for his potential change. Daniel Hurst nodded. We will be recommending community accountability hours and mandatory behavioral counseling. Chase nodded stiffly. I'll do it. Veronica added. I will, also. This was not routine. Daniel noted it with raised brows. You, Ms. Sterling, your actions were verbal at worst. Veronica answered firmly. Then let the consequence be symbolic. I need the correction too. Silence. Then Daniel Hurst nodded. This may be the first time I've seen the powerful request responsibility. Outside the conference room, down the hallway, a janitor passed by. An older man named Byron Shaw, lean, African-American, with graying hair and a limp in his left leg from an old mining accident. He had seen Frostwell's transformations over decades. As he overheard the conversation, he whispered to himself, maybe this town's got a chance after all. Inside, Eli turned to Alara. Ms. Hayes, you have the right to provide a victim statement. Alara stepped forward, holding Aster, who rested calm and trusting in her arms. Her voice was soft, but strong as polished steel. I don't want revenge. I just want this to stop. Not just for me, but for whoever the next target would be. Daniel's voice softened. Do you feel you are safe now? Alara looked at Chase. He did not look away. Yes, she said, because the fear isn't there anymore. Something shifted in the air. Aster, as if sensing closure, wagged her tail gently. The meeting ended. As Veronica and Chase walked out, they paused. Veronica turned to Alara. We will be helping with Aster's vet bills, and will also be donating to the local animal rescue. I'll call them tomorrow. Alara felt a swell of unexpected warmth. Thank you, Chase added softly. And if Aster ever needs anything, food, supplies. Alara smiled faintly. What she needs most is kindness. Chase nodded, as though he understood the weight of that word for the first time in his life. Before they left, Aster wiggled free from Alara's hold and padded over to Eli. The officer bent down, and Aster nuzzled into his palm. Alara watched, struck by the tenderness. Eli's compassion wasn't selective. It flowed naturally. Aster then looked up at Eli, as if silently asking, You protected us. Will you keep doing that? And Eli, with gentle assurance in his eyes, almost seemed to answer without speaking. Yes. Night came upon Frostwell with an air of anticipation, like the world itself leaned forward. The day had ended in uneasy peace, but beneath it ran a quiet current of reckoning. The town absorbed every whispered rumor, every retelling of last night's confrontation at the diner, every hint that what had once been buried in privilege was now shaking loose. At 8:13 p.m., Snowfield Diner was full again, more than usual, locals, workers, neighbors. They had come not simply to eat, but to see, not to watch a spectacle, but to witness accountability. Aster lay behind the counter in her blanket nest, healthier than ever. She would occasionally lift her head to observe passing boots, then rest again. Alara Hayes stood behind her, pouring coffee and greeting familiar faces. But tonight she carried herself differently, not smaller and cautious, but steady and affirmed. Even Sarah McCleary, the silver-streaked trucker, had softened her armor, speaking with Alara more gently now, not as defender, but as equal. Then the door swung open. Veronica Sterling and Chase Turner entered once more. They wore similar coats as before, but something had changed. They walked among people rather than above them. Their expressions were serious, resolute. This time they did not move with caution, but with intention. Chase approached the counter. 2 coffees, please. Plain. No demands, no customization. Just an order like anybody else. Alara nodded and began preparing the drinks. Then the sound came. A distant rumble. Engines. Multiple. The diner grew quiet. People turned their heads toward the window. Outside, through swirling snow, came the sight that would freeze the town's pulse. 2 state patrol vehicles, white with navy striping, rolling down Main Street, then a third, then a fourth. Lights flashing, not frantic, but authoritative. There was no siren, only the soft blue pulse of rotating beacons painting the snow and storefronts like a slow heartbeat of justice. Chase inhaled sharply. He recognized those lights. They were not his father's jurisdiction. They were not people he could call off. These were state enforcers, summoned by the investigation. Inside the diner, no one moved. The door opened again, but not by a local. A trooper stepped in. State Officer Marion Holt, a woman in her late 30s, medium height, Native American descent with braid-wrapped dark hair. She carried herself with upright professionalism. Her uniform bore no softness, only purpose. She had a reputation for impartiality and an unwavering sense of duty. Behind her entered another. Officer Eric Delgado, a lean man with calm, dark eyes and a quiet demeanor. He walked with slow certainty, scanning the room without accusation, only observation. The diner felt like a stage suspended in quiet breath. Officer Holt spoke first. "We are here to escort individuals for processing and formal statements." She did not shout. She didn't need to. Her voice carried inherent authority. Chase stood, not defiantly, not angrily, but knowingly. "I'll cooperate." Veronica rose beside him immediately. "I will as well." Then something unexpected happened. Sarah McCleary, who once spat verbal nails, softened her expression and called out, "Good luck, you two." Not sarcastic, not mocking, supportive. Chase looked at her, almost startled, as though kindness was harder to absorb than judgment. He nodded back. Then another figure entered, Officer Eli Cross. He didn't stride in like a hero. He didn't cut the air with dominance. He simply walked inside with calm steadiness, the way a lighthouse stands in storm wind. He approached the troopers. "I have the footage and the witness statements ready." Officer Holt nodded. "You did the right thing bringing this forward." Eli shrugged slightly. "Just doing my job." But Alara, standing behind the counter, understood what that really meant. It meant doing his job even when the target was the police chief's son. Officer Delgado approached Chase. "You'll ride with us. Standard procedure. This is not an arrest, but it is a formal accountability process." Chase remained calm. "I understand." A soft sound broke the tension. A small bark. Aster. She had risen again, head tilted, ears pointed at Chase. Then she trotted across the floor, weaving between chairs until she reached him. The entire diner's eyes followed. She sat at his feet, the same puppy he once mocked. Chase's face almost crumpled. He crouched down, lightly rubbing behind her soft ears. "Thank you, little one. You're kinder than I deserve." Aster gave a soft wag in reply. Veronica stood nearby, watching the interaction with quiet reverence. She leaned down and gently touched Aster's neck as well. "You taught us something," she murmured, "about grace." Eli stepped forward. "Time to go." Before leaving, Chase looked to Alara. "I'm sorry. For pushing you, for disrespecting you, for everything." Alara nodded once, solemn but not cold. "Learn from it." Chase nodded back, tears forming but held. Veronica added, "We'll come back when this is done, not to demand or impose, but to show respect." They stepped outside with the officers. and the town of Frostwell watched, not as vultures, but as witnesses. The state troopers placed them in 2 vehicles, respectfully, without force. The doors shut with gentle firmness. The engines idled, then pulled away, leaving only tire tracks carved into fresh snow. Inside the diner, the collective silence rearranged itself, transforming from anticipation into reflection. Sarah exhaled. Maybe they'll come out better people. Howard Finnegan, old man, quiet philosopher, nodded. People break, people repair. Ilara returned to the counter, feeling a strange mixture of relief and gravity. Aster followed, curling into her nest once more, sighing through her little snout like settling embers. Eli stayed. He approached the counter. For a moment, he simply stood there, watching Ilara stroke Aster's back. Then he spoke. You stood up when it mattered most, not just for her, but for yourself. Ilara smiled, small but real. I didn't have backup. I had to do something. Eli shook his head softly. You had the right to be protected. That's our job. Ilara looked at him, truly looked, and replied, Some officers forget that. His eyes met hers, steady and honest. I don't. Outside, snow began to fall again, softly, like feathers drifting from winter's hand. But this snowfall felt different. Not like the storm that began everything. This one felt like a cleansing, like a reset, like a second beginning. The morning after the patrol cars vanished into the night, Frostwell awakened under a sky blushed with pale gold. Dawn crept gently across the rooftops, melting sharp shadows into soft gradients. Snow glittered like powdered crystal, and the air carried that rare stillness, the kind that follows resolution, not turmoil. This dawn felt like a new chapter. At Snowfield Diner, Thomas Keene unlocked the door at 6 a.m., wearing his usual worn coat and grumbling about early mornings. But secretly, he was relieved. The storm of accountability had passed, and the diner could breathe again. Ilara Hayes slipped in at 6:07 a.m., carrying Aster in her arms. The puppy now wriggled with enthusiastic energy, her coat glossy, her eyes bright and inquisitive. She was no longer the fragile, feverish creature Ilara had sheltered beneath the counter in fear. Now, Aster padded forward eagerly, nose twitching at the sense of cooking bacon and brewing coffee. Thomas glanced over his shoulder and muttered, If that dog keeps getting healthier, she'll start demanding a salary. Ilara chuckled. She'd work for snacks. Aster barked once, as if agreeing. The first regulars entered gradually. Mrs. Greaves, Howard Finnegan, Jake Rollins, Sarah McCleary. Each one exchanged glances with Ilara, warm, relieved, respectful. They had not merely witnessed the events, they had become part of them. But today's tone was different. No one whispered, no one murmured about Chase, no one fed on old drama. There was only a quiet, steady present. At 7:21 a.m., the diner door opened again, ringing its little bell. Officer Eli Cross stepped through, still in his uniform, though minus his winter cap. He looked slightly tired, not from defeat, but from fulfillment. His job had been done thoroughly and honorably. Aster's ears shot up. She recognized him immediately. She galloped across the diner floor, tail swinging like a furry metronome, and skidded to a stop at Eli's boots. He bent down, not hurriedly, but with gentle intention, letting her sniff his hands before rubbing the soft curvature behind her ears. "Good morning, little warrior," he said quietly. Ilara approached, wiping her hands on her apron. "You're up early." Eli straightened and gave a faint smile. "Paperwork, statements, I've got a lot to process." He didn't complain, he merely stated a fact. Ilara nodded sympathetically. "Must be a heavy burden." Eli shook his head. "Not heavy, just important." They didn't speak more for a moment, but the silence wasn't empty. It was comfortable. Thomas emerged from the kitchen and waved a spatula. "Coffee for Frostwell's finest?" Eli chuckled. "Please." He sat at the counter, but something unexpected happened. Aster didn't return to her basket. She sat at Eli's feet, like a quiet sentinel. Ilara noticed, and she didn't stop her. Because somewhere along the line, Aster had decided that her world was now bigger than one person. It included the man who had stood between her and cruelty. Breakfast hours drifted by. The diner buzzed with its familiar harmony, forks clinking, plates sliding, laughter rising gently like steam. Eli eventually finished his meal and stood to leave. Ilara offered Aster's leash, but Aster sat stubbornly beside her and refused to move. Eli crouched and spoke softly to the dog. "I'll see you tonight." Aster blinked, almost like she understood. Then she huffed out a sigh and returned to Ilara's side. As noon approached, sunlight spilled into the diner like liquid warmth. Outside, ice melted from lampposts and gutters. The whole town felt like thawing emotion. Later that afternoon, Ilara stepped outside with Aster for a walk. The puppy bounded forward into the snow, leaving tiny paw prints like punctuation marks in white sentences. The streets were calm, with only a few pedestrians wrapped in scarves and thick coats. At the far end of the sidewalk, they encountered Howard Finnegan, scraping frost from his windshield. He looked up and smiled. "The three of you changed something in this town." Ilara blinked. "Three of us?" Howard nodded. "You, the dog, and the officer." Ilara looked toward the diner, where Eli was visible through the window, talking with Thomas, and she understood what Howard meant. They hadn't fought a war. They hadn't shouted or escalated. They had simply held a line. Aster tugged at her leash, wanting to continue exploring. And so, they walked, past the post office, past the hardware store, past the quiet row of homes dusted in snow. The town was old, worn, and humble, but today it felt radiant. Along the way, they even passed Byron Shaw, the janitor from the police station. He was clearing snow from a storefront with methodical sweeps. He raised a hand. "Mornin', Miss Hayes, and mornin' to that hero pup." Aster barked twice. Byron laughed. At dusk, when the sun sagged low and painted the sky in copper tones, Ilara and Aster returned to the diner. Eli was waiting, not dramatically, not expectantly, but simply present, leaning against the counter, sipping tea. Ilara approached. He gestured toward the street. "Come outside." She raised an eyebrow, curious, and followed him into the evening light. Aster trotted happily behind. They stood just outside the diner's door. "This will be short," Eli said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper, neat, official, bearing state insignia. Ilara's face tensed. Was something wrong? Eli handed it to her. The formal accountability recommendation. She skimmed it. Community service hours, behavior rehabilitation sessions, civic contribution to animal welfare program, and then a handwritten note at the bottom, suggested by Officer Eli Cross. Ilara looked up. "You proposed animal welfare service for them?" Eli nodded. "Because understanding vulnerability changes people, and there's no better teacher than a creature that trusts even after being hurt." Aster pressed her warm body against his leg, as if seconding that opinion. For a long breath, the three of them just stood there, woman, man, and dog, bathed in copper twilight. Not as symbols, not as heroes, but as healing presences. Inside the diner, Mrs. Greaves looked out the window and whispered to Sarah, "That's a family that chose itself." Sarah smiled. "And they'll do good for this town." Ilara glanced down at Aster, then at Eli. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes spoke for her. "I'm not alone anymore." The evening deepened, stars emerging one by one, silver beads over a velvet sky. Lamps along Main Street glowed warm against the cold. Inside the diner, familiar laughter greeted the dinner crowd. And outside, in the quiet settling snow, three shadows stretched side by side. Aster in the middle, Ilara at one side, Eli at the other, connected, unforced. In a world where many people forget compassion, sometimes the smallest voice, the softest paw, and the quietest courage together become a new beginning. That night, Frostwell slept peacefully, because winter had finally broken, not just in the sky, but in their hearts. In the end, this story reminds us that God's miracles do not always arrive with thunder or bright signs. Sometimes they come quietly through the loyalty of a small puppy who refuses to give up through the strength God places in ordinary people when they feel they have nothing left, and through the courage of someone who chooses compassion instead of anger. In our everyday lives, we face storms too, moments of loneliness, worry, or doubt. But God walks beside us even in those silent hours, guiding our steps and healing our hearts in ways we often only recognize afterward. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need encouragement today. Leave a comment to tell us your thoughts and type Amen if you believe in the quiet miracles God still works in this world. Do not forget to subscribe to support this channel so we can continue bringing you stories of faith, hope, and kindness. May God bless you and your family with peace, protection, and warmth.